So have you ever wondered what's the difference between a producer like Boris Brejcha and a new beginner and the intermediate, almost pro producers? I mainly took Space Diver as a reference track and created 3 different versions of it, and I will try to show the main areas that I see on the intermediate and beginner producers, and of course the main highlights that you should be considering when you listen to a producer like Boris Brejcha. So hop in, so this will be fun. The beginner producers often start with the common sample packs, and those kicks are pretty long, and the beginner producer often tends to not control the tail of the kick. And then the other thing that I often see is like the random EQing. Probably they try to compensate their room, but they are not aware of it, and then there's saturator everywhere, and in occasional drum basses as well, so the kick turns into a big mush. And of course they often have the main simple rhythm like this. The one thing is very typical when they have the sub bass like this, because they are not advanced enough for sidechaining and using it for the mixing purposes, they try to compensate the stuff by EQing and try to saturate it to hear it a bit more. And then they end up low end. And when you have low end like this, of course you are not hearing it, and they try to compensate with some random bass sound. And of course we have a lot of EQs and saturation on this one, of course. I mean, it has its charm, but this is definitely not something a pro producers would use. Simple clap sound. Oftentimes what I hear is actually like something like this. So very loud clap sound is like bum, bum, bum all the time. And then of course a simple hi-hat. And then we have the drum of the simple track. Is it entertaining? Yes, but it's awfully unbalanced. The beginner producers of course doesn't know much about the sound design, so they just go for any cool sound that comes with the synthesizer that they're using, something like this. And it oftentimes has just insert reverb, probably kind of even more, 50% of the rivet, and very long tails. It sounds epic, but when you listen to the together with the track, it turns into a really big mush. And then they have this plug sound, and they oftentimes extremely repetitive, mushed into reverb. And on top of that, of course, adding that driving lead sound comes from with some weird EQs. The problem is now is that we are not hearing anything due to those super tails everywhere and no sidechain somewhere. Nothing is dynamic, so we start to see boosting all these frequencies. The issue is like once you start EQing, actually you are boosting that frequency, and then you suddenly can't hear something else, and then you go down and you boost that element or that instrument. So in that it turns into like a feedback loop that you just keep boosting stuff more and more. And that's the main reason that people actually tend to say try to cut things instead, because you can't cut everything, so that it's a bit healthier for the beginner producer. And the thing that I see with the pad sounds that they go absolutely for the biggest pad sound that is in that preset pack that they were using, like this. Of course some EQing on top of that, and the more common things that I see is, this is super typical, is the notes are just always 1 bar or half bar or 2 bars. Everything is super predictable because of that. And it is not dynamic at all, so we had already problem with all the dynamics in the track, and now we have a even sustained pad sound, and now we have this sausage track, I will say. And then of course they oftentimes have super risers and super ambience, and the ambience, what I mean, just like a really loud white noise, and quite oftentimes really a bit tacky riser sounds, something like this. And the issue with them is they're absolutely max level, so they're pretty loud in the track, so you always hear that risers in the places that we were not expecting, for example here. I'm really exaggerating everything. It's not that bad oftentimes. But this stage of the producer is oftentimes pretty short. So after probably like 3 to 6 months, you will understand most of the concepts that I've talked here, and you will move to the next stage, which I would call intermediate to pro stage. So let's open the next project that I called Intermediate Pro and talk about this one a little more. So in this level, the producers know most of the concepts, but probably like in some of the clutch things pro producers use. We will come back to that clutch things in the last level, but let's take a look how these producers approaches. The main thing that I see oftentimes is because they hear a lot about the mono sub and they get extremely scared of using the stereo field on the low end, suddenly everything turns into a really mono sound. So in this case, we have this sub bass and something driving on top of that. And of course, the kick is more in the control at the moment. More posing it over a sound. I would say there's nothing wrong with it, but there's nothing unique with it neither, I will say. But it's all right. Like the sidechain is used properly and the sounds are nicely sitting together. There's a still bit, I will say, overuse of saturator and so on, but it's already fine. The biggest issue that I see, and this is so typical, so typical, is that there are way too many layers for the very simple sounds. So I exaggerate again a little bit just to make it a bit more obvious. For example, I have a 16 hats here. Like we have 3 layers of 16 hats for a really simple sound. We could have been just using single layer, and if you think about it, in this concept, you would even avoid maybe using 16 net because it doesn't really fit to this track because we are more groovy rather than driving track, right? And the same thing here, we have 2 layers of clap and snare. And the main problem here is that because now the producer knows a lot of new concepts, that producer wants to utilize everything that the producers learn. And suddenly we are overdoing stuff, the simple things, for example, simple clap sounds or simple 16 hat sound. And if you listen to it again, it doesn't sound bad at all. Quite crispy, quite full, but we had also full drums, and now we have full claps as well. So we are eating up from frequency range by having everything fat and shiny. So we have this now loop sound. Again, there is nothing wrong with it. It sounds good to me, but this will end up working again against us, especially when we have more minimalistic stuff going on. The concept continues with this one, for example, in the horn sound. This would have been enough for a cleaner sound, but now we have a lot of layers. We have to have another layer to make everything heard a bit more. And every new instrument means that we are getting more and more away from where we started, where we wanted to make. We will make for this minimal techno track, and suddenly we are going into progressive direction because there are a lot of things going on in the track. And together. And then we have the same concept going on, like we have this new layers, the driving layer for the sound. And we have the same concept on the pads. So a lot of layers, but the main issue that I see, the decision making. So when we listen to this track start to end, it will sound a bit flat simply because the placement or how we utilize the instrument is a bit wrong. Because if you think about it, we will make a track that is dynamic so that we really have fun while listening to it. What I mean is, like, if you purely taking a look at the visual, like everything is here, there are a lot of things, and we could probably use it more sparsely so to emphasize each instrument when we were playing. Balance wise, we won't hear too much problem here, but try to focus on each decision making. And the one thing that is also missing here is that actually we don't have much ear candies, because we don't have a room for the ear candies, because probably producer who knows how to make ear candies, because there are a lot of stuff going on and layers. There's no room for ear candies, but there's no emptiness in the track. And if you take a look at the track now and listen to everything, you will hear a bit more. At first listen, it probably sounds fine, but it is not something that really unique or something that we will probably want to listen one more time. Once I will show you the Boris track, everything will make a bit more sense because you will hear this done in the original track, original reference track. So let's take a look at the next one now. So first of all, this is actually second take of this video because the first one was, there was a content ID on the YouTube, so I have to record and change the chord progression a little bit. But I left the remake here, so when you get the project file from my Patreon, you can actually take a look how the original sound. But the changes that I made is really minimal. The first thing that I changed is just the chord progression is slightly different, and of course that driving plug sound here is slightly different as well. It was just repeating in the original track, so I just changed it slightly. Okay, what are we seeing here? What makes this track different from others? The first thing is actually, if you listen to the low end, you will hear that it's actually stereo than mono. I actually stalked a little bit Boris Brejcha's YouTube videos to understand what he's doing. I kind of knew what he did, but I wanted to know exactly what he was doing. In this case, the sub bass here is actually, he mentioned a lot of times that he is just using FAB filter 1. This is just single oscillator synthesizer, nothing really more than that. And the main stereo effect was actually coming from the Timeless FAB filter plugin again. And there was just chorus effect in the sound, or chorus-like effect, I would say basically. And this, as you can see, the low end is actually cut. So the super lows below 56 Hz is still mono. And on top of that, I just used bass mono to see, this is just a visualization, so I can take it off actually. The bass mono to make it everything mono below 64, so that the super subs are mono, but the rest is, I'm giving a bit room to be stereo. So it sounds like this. The other thing that we didn't mention too much in the Pro video is that actually things that is automated in the sound itself. So the sound, the attack here is automated. So you can hear that kind of sound. And he also mentions that actually you use the LFO inside the one and then change the LFO amount in the synthesizer. It also gives the same effect. So if you put more LFO, you hear the attack more. And there are like candies here and there. For example, here at the end of the track, you will hear it in a short, just single head and returns back. And of course, a single kick, not much processing, just shortening up the key, up the tail, and then group processing them together, just to give this glue all. And the clap side, again, his claps were really stereo as well. You can definitely hear the splash from right to left in the clap. It could be just sample itself that way. In this case, what I had here is like, I have two layers. The first layer is that splash sound, and the second layer is this organic clap sound. What I did basically is that took ozone and took the super highs over 4 kHz and just increase the stereo image of that part. So the highs are a bit more stereo. I've been stereoized a little bit more there. And the other thing that you wouldn't see, for example, in the Pro Producer, that a bit more clutch things, I will say, actually using reverb as an insert and driving it and putting it to the gate. So the tail is dark. So even though we use a big reverb and washer reverb, we are cutting off the tail so that the clap is still kind of tight. You see that this gate is closing down. So we get rid of that tails so that it doesn't clog our minimal techno track in this case. Sounds like this. And then a nice off-hat sound, simple, really not more than one, because again we are aiming for the minimal track. We have this feel a little bit groovy, like we also automate it to velocity so that we feel the groove while it's playing. Distorted a bit. And we are using delay house effect to pan them around a little bit, that splash sound without it. It's like super fast feel. Again, this was from original track in this way, so I just replicated. And it's also sidechaining the kick. There are a lot of dynamic mixing, like a lot of sidechaining here and there in the track, so that we can always feel this kick and groove all the time. So if we play together one more time. Very clean, to the point, nothing really too fancy. And then we have this horn sound. Hear how clean horn itself is. compared to the other horn sound that we looked previously. The clean sound, but because the mix is not clogged with billions of different stuff, we can still hear this nice analog vibe in it. The main idea is like using unison to make them a bit stereo, and having this hard clip distortion to get this analog vibe out of it. It's really warm, distorted sound. And then we have a bit filter cutoff play here, but at the end of the track, nothing that important in that sense. And the one single trick is like it's super fast sidechain the kick. And to do that, we are actually filtering out the initial thumb of the kick. So if I play here, so you can hear what I'm using. That super fast sidechain actually makes it really cool when the kick hits and horn comes at the same time. Really, really cool. And here comes a bit clutch things, and you will see more producers, especially like in the minimal techno does this, is that a lot of ear candies here and there makes the track much more interesting, much more fun to listen to. And the first one here is actually resampled. This horn is resampled with a lot of reverb, sounds like this. So here in the horn part, they together sounds like this. The second one is actually the same sound, but rather than automating everything and having a lot of lines, this is also like a workflow thing. I just copied it, duplicated, and then change the attack of the sound and make it a bit more cooler, longer. So this is what I was meaning, that the clutch things that you will hear in the producers, like that, utilizing this kind of a little bit more slightly smarter things to make the sound a bit more evolving, a bit more dynamic. Let's listen together. And then we have the pings. And this is really interesting because in the pro track, I said that our use of the clutch stuff like ear candies are missing. This is a super example. For example, in the original track, we have this nice ping sound. This is I call the reverse ping, and then we have call. I can call this call, and then we are responding this one like at the end of 16 bar later. And this is a response to this. They are basically the same sound, the attack is different. If I just show you the ping, it just made really, again, sound design was quite simple as well. It's just a unison with the square wave and really nice attack on the cutoff. And of course, LFO to the, I think the tuning of the sound. So there's like a sound. And then we are distorting quite a bit with this downsample. Hence, we are getting this really nice, cool tail effect. If you had a lot of layers, you will be never able to hear this tail, this distortion effect clearly enough to appreciate it. But once you have a bit more cleaner track overall, you will hear this kind of details and appreciate the work behind it. If you feel like it has been an interesting video up to now, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because it really helps a lot, because it really helps the channel a lot and keeps me motivated to make more videos like this. But let's continue now. And finally here, to make us remember this tail, I resampled this one and reversed it so that we have this nice, cool, long. So that we remember that call in the beginning of this loop. And then we have this driving sound. Actually, the driving sound was like this in the origin track. The couple of things, again, stereo, be careful about the stereo. This is like pinging right and left all the time. I actually thought in the beginning like it is probably just LFO right and left all the time, but then I realized it's probably using also house on top of that, so this gets really confusing, right and left, but I can still hear both sides and so on. So what I did, use 2 square wave with a very fast decay time. The main trick here was really using the third one and putting onto the main pitch envelope. It's like loop, loop, loop sound coming from there, and a bit distortion tube, giving this more analog sound. And then another filter afterwards, so that we can cut off these distortion super highs. The main reason that I had the ozone here that I want to show you is like this is what I was talking, right, left, but this is like a super pinned. In the original track, it was a bit more splashed, so that is the reason I use this guy over here. So we have a bit like, let me put it here one more time so you can see. So a bit more like a splash. Actually, you can see we could definitely have done this to make it even cleaner, right? Maybe take it here, do it one more time. So that now we are in the right stage. So you can do the small adjustments all the time to make it sound even more perfect. And then we have a small EQ here just to cut off some super resonance. And together. Now we appreciate every sound in the track rather than having this mush of sounds, I will say. Also, the main development of the tracks makes more sense. Like we have these playful things here and there, and then we are more logical development because we are changing, adding and extracting new stuff, and track evolves more together, even though track itself is quite minimal, right? And then when it comes to pad sound, the one thing is very typical is that contra harmonies in the sound. Not only the main harmonies, like this was also one of the things that was lacking in the pro sound. Like we had this nice progression, and then we are opening up the cutoff. This is basically kind of sawtooth and square in between and out of unison to give this string vibe. Some reverb and chorus, and also a bit white noise to give this air to the sound. And of course, I was meaning that in the original track, there was a least contrasting sound. I don't know if it is coming from another bass layer or the pad, but I just did with the pad sound. Really tiny, really small sound, but it's just there, just right amount to not take away from the main, I would say the main leads, main pad, but just complementing just enough. And then adding a slightly white noise. See how we are filling up all the background together. But this sound is not loud to take over the other things, right? Just simple but effective. And if we play all together one more time. And on top of that, just to make this excitement a bit more, there was a ride in the sound. This can actually be also open hi-hat or maybe this one was probably a splash sound, but I just used a ride for this, just to give this kind of excitement and pan to the left in the stereo field. See how much we utilize in the stereo field, to be honest. Like everything is there somewhere, sitting somewhere in the stereo to make the sound more stereo or make everything a bit more exciting to listen to. And this is the point as well where we bring in the beeps. In the pro track, for example, the beeps were everywhere. But here, we just bring it here for a short amount of time to give this excitement when we are really hitting that chorus. And it is a really simple sound. Again, the purpose is not making the fattest beep sound ever, just making something easy to hear, fun to hear, but not taking really over the track, but just filling a purpose. And then we have some nice white noise riser, but this is coming from the serum, so we made it more passing the track. I think I have some effects on it and use the up white. Yeah, some a little bit reverb and of course automating a bit. And I'm using actually band pass so that the size of the sound is stable. If you just use the low pass, the more you open the sound, the bigger sound gets, it takes more space. But if you use band pass, the amount, the sound levels will be say similar at least, and the frequency range will be increasing all the time. Just like that. And then of course we have another white percussion here, just here at the break to make it a bit more fun. Take a look at this. Take a look at here. We barely even hear it, but it's there, the cha sound. In the original track, there are even more candies and everywhere, but I just took a small piece of it, so that's the reason we don't have more. But if you take a listen a bit more critically, you will hear all the small things going around in the track, I would say. But let's do start the end, and you can see a bit more how it sounds. Again, I changed the chord progression slightly, both in the driving plug and the pad, but the rest should be almost identical. Let's take a look. So you see how smooth the transition was back to the original point, simply because all this candy is like connecting things together and making everything more smoother and fluent and dynamic. And that's what I mean when I talk about making track more dynamic, making things evolving, making things entertaining. As I mentioned, if you want to take a look at the original one-on-one remake, the only difference really be the main and driving plug and the pad progression, but the rest is the same. It will be available on my Patreon. Other than that, let me know actually if you enjoy this type of content, because this is the first time that I do such a thing, so that I can pinpoint the different stuff for the different levels. Let me know if you like it, so I know that you want more content like this. But other than that, I will catch you in the next one. Goodbye.